As any well-versed Top Gear fan can tell you, if you dive into the early history of the show's run expecting high-octane antics from the likes of Clarkson, Hammond and May from the get-go, then you are going to be sorely disappointed. Not only because said antics are comparatively tame, but because 1/3 of the iconic trio wasn't even there yet. Though James May, who had been relegated to the role of magazine columnist since late 1999 after a promising yet ultimately unsuccessful run as presenter, had initially been offered the role due to his positive relationship with lead presenter Jeremy Clarkson, he would choose to decline. After a period of uncertainty and hundreds of auditions from hopefuls across the country, the BBC would settle on Jason Dawe, a Cornish used car dealer with over 15 years of experience but no on-screen credits to his name, to accompany lead presenter Jeremy Clarkson, along with former Men and Motors Motor Week presenter Richard Hammond. Dawe would only last a single series of 10 episodes before he was shown the door, his role replaced with original pick James May, who had a more optimistic outlook than he did 6 months earlier. But who was this fourth man? What did he do? How was he selected for the show, and why was he ultimately fired? Born in 1967, Dawe was the son of a traffic police officer, which did not discourage him from getting his licence at the age of 17. Upon learning to drive, Dawe would take on a boy racer attitude, believing that a good driver was also a fast one. Upon leaving school, Dawe would get a job selling insurance, and after a particularly lucrative month, Dawe would spend his paycheck on a car, which was a Triumph Spitfire Mark III that had its original 1300cc engine removed and replaced with a 2-litre engine from a TR6. Unfortunately, this car wouldn't last long, as Dawe would collide with a Volvo estate and wake up on a hospital drip, the Spitfire completely wrecked. Undeterred from this near-death experience, Dawe would start his career working within the automotive industry in 1986, beginning as a used car salesman with the first car he sold being a beige-coloured Peugeot 205 GL. During the ensuing couple of years, he would be successful enough in his endeavour to ensure a move to London in 1989 and began working with manufacturers directly. For the next 13 years after that, Dawe would work for manufacturers such as Rover, Citroën, Mercedes-Benz and Porsche. During this time he would win National Salesman of the Year twice, for 2 different car manufacturers, although the specific marks were not publicly disclosed. In late 1996, Dawe would join Mitac, an international firm that advised car manufacturers and individual dealerships alike, where he spent the following 6 years working hard with every company he did business with on car launches and sales technique programs, among other things. During this phase of his career, Dawe had a particular talent for making presentations in front of live audiences, which certainly helped his case as he already had some of the prerequisite skills needed to present a television show under his belt. During the planned 2002 revival of Top Gear, one of the members at the office proposed the idea of sending in audition tapes for hopeful presenters, which resulted in hundreds of tapes being sent, the crew then subsequently whittling these down to a few dozen. Each candidate was asked to guide Jeremy Clarkson around a particular car before performing in a mock news segment. During his live audition, Dawe was noticeably better than anyone they had previously considered for the role, as he had a wide knowledge of cars owing to his vast experience within the trade, and did so in a manner which would supposedly convince anyone to buy a used car from him on the spot. According to Richard Porter, Jason Dawe was the first presenter other than Clarkson to be hired for the show, and was followed by Richard Hammond sometime later. The trio would spend the summer of 2002 working on their first individual pieces to camera, before regrouping in August for the recording of 2 pilot episodes which have never seen the light of day. Filming the first pilot was over in a breeze thanks to the auto cue guiding the presenters across the episode's material, and a sweltering one at that, as the many set pieces employed by the pilot, along with the strong studio lighting at the height of summer, caused the presenters to have visible sheens on their faces before filming had wrapped up, and in the end it was decided to have a second go. During the filming of this subsequent pilot episode, Dawe would interpret the crew's instruction to act themselves to mean being particularly aggressive with the Renaults on display, including ripping off several trim pieces in a bid to demonstrate the interior build quality. Without an auto cue, the presenters were directionless, and it showed, as supposedly the news segment went way beyond what could be reasonably cut into a single programme. Not to mention the absence of studio lighting meant the episode was very dark. Eventually, both of these pilots would be scrapped in their near entirety, and Top Gear would end up premiering in a decidedly different format in October of that year. Of course, this video wasn't made to talk about the hardships the production crew had while filming the Top Gear pilot. We're here to talk about Jason Dawe, the oft-forgotten fourth musketeer. Appearing for the first time in the November 2002 issue of Top Gear magazine, Dawe's name would be rather unfortunately misspelt by the editor responsible as Jason Dawe, though in the main sub-article featuring Clarkson's co-presenters, it is indeed spelt correctly. In the magazine's hierarchy, Dawe's column was essentially a replacement for Dominic Littlewoods, who had been temporarily appointed by those responsible as a used car expert, and it is probable, given his appearance in the 2002 Birmingham Motor Show special, in addition to his role on the Lost TV series Wrong Car Right Car, that Littlewood, along with co-presenter and former Top Gear host Jason Barlow, was the BBC's original intended presenting team alongside Clarkson, with the latter favouring Dawe. The first time we as an audience saw Jason Dawe on Top Gear, barring a brief clip from the introduction sequence, was during the inaugural news segment, where he didn't have that much to say. Later on that episode, he'd present the first of his insider dealing segments, where Dawe gave used and new car buying advice to the general British public. From a contemporary standpoint, this was quite useful, as it brought mainstream exposure to deals that car buyers might have been interested in, and for the next couple of weeks, this is what his role on the show boiled down to. As co-presenter, Dawe was at least somewhat competent, that is until the time came to present his first of only 9 pieces to camera. In Top Gear's 4th episode, Dawe was tasked with filming a retrospective for the then freshly out of production Nissan Skyline, and well, it wasn't great.
In the World League table of supercars, Japan has only made one real contribution, the Nissan Skyline.
Oh, that was nice.
That was weird. A lot of people were critical over this segment in particular, with Dawe having failed to do quite a bit of basic research about the car. In particular, fans of the GTR marque were livid over many of the claims Dawe made, from alleged exploding brake discs on the R32 to the effect that installing an ECU chip will have on the engine, all the way to the claim that the R33 and R34 Skylines used the same turbocharger, which is again not true, as although they were both Garrett T28s, the version designed for the R34, the Series 2, was significantly larger in size. His next segment, focusing on the used market for the Peugeot 206, fared just as well, when you consider it was cut out of basically every international airing of the episode. Not many people at this point particularly cared about a Peugeot 206 as their choice of used car, particularly when said model could still be had brand new. The next episode fared a little better, as he talked about used Volkswagen Golfs and recommended consumers to pay extra attention towards cars in undesirable colours, particularly those in Hulk green, which is a facet many fans of the earlier episodes recall in retrospect about his short-lived tenure on the show. As the series went on, Dawe would feature in less serious segments, perhaps most notably during what can be considered to be the series' first build challenge in episode 5, where a Rover 800 would be turned into a budget Bond car with the help of future Wheeler Dealers star Ed China. To demonstrate the effectiveness of its rear-mounted T-tray deflector shield, Dawe would portray a stereotypical Bond baddie, armed with a paintball gun. Dawe would fire multiple rounds at the Rover and marked the first time we saw him as anything other than an informative mouthpiece. This degree of comic relief continued 2 episodes later, as at the time Ford had recently acquired Norwegian electric car startup Think, and hoped to make a splash in the ultra-mini market primarily occupied at the time by the petrol-powered smart car. However, with a reported range of less than 50 miles depending on the example, with some not even lasting 25 miles, Top Gear decided to lampoon this lack of range by having it race against Jason Dawe, where it was depicted to have ran out of juice just before the finish line, leaving Dawe the winner. However, of these films, there is surely one that sticks out from the rest, at least in my opinion. Around the time the show's reboot first came under fire, primarily from environmentalist groups who reasoned that Top Gear had a bad influence on young people, Dawe wanted to prove that children inherently liked fast cars, and so he brought round a few sports and supercars for them to peruse and listen to as he revved their engines. Ultimately, it would be the Pagani Zonda that won the children over the most. Or so that was until the even lower, sleeker, older Lamborghini Countach roared onto the playground, smoke freely billowing out of its 20-year-old exhausts. Once that happened, the Countach was the clear winner, with the school children being made instant fanatics. What this segment ultimately proved, so long as you don't indoctrinate children from an early age with concepts that they cannot comprehend at their level of maturity, the only thing that they will like is something that looks or sounds cool to them. It's a lesson which many people can still learn today. This segment was little more than just good, clean, innocent fun, and it contrasts heavily with the eco-terror angle that opposition to the show tarred the programme with in the wake of this segment. In addition to the constant barrage of doom and gloom, all school children post-inconvenient truth ended up being fed by these individuals, and the rest of their ilk. After this episode, however, it seemed clear that Dawe's role on the show just wasn't panning out the way that everyone around the show had originally hoped, and during episodes 8 and 9 he had minimal screen time in the sense that he only appeared during the news segment, which Clarkson interrupted as Dawe attempted to sell the audience of a good deal they could have with the Vauxhall Astra Turbo. Dawe looks visibly irritated by Clarkson's behaviour and promptly shuts up. He did help with the stripping of the Jaguar XJS that would end up at the bottom of the ocean, making a few humorous comments, but this wasn't really enough to keep those who were closely monitoring the show's progress impressed. Whether subconsciously or not, it seemed as though Dawe was slowly being written out of the show from behind the scenes. In the final episode of Series 1, Dawe had what would turn out to be his biggest role in a single episode. He would present the show's second fastest faith race, which sought the country's fastest religion, in addition to a segment on old bangers. For this latter segment, it is extremely interesting and yet somewhat melancholic to observe the tremendous variety of the used car market from 2002, compared to how it is nowadays. Even if you had virtually nothing in the bank, you could still obtain something with a decent future collector's value. You essentially had a choice between buying something you needed, like a small sub-1 litre car which could be mended incredibly easily with basic tools, and something you wanted, like a cheap second-hand coupe. To sum up Jason Dawe's sole season at Top Gear, it definitely had more than a few high points, such as his trip to the playground, his performance during the XJS segment, and his role as comic relief in general. He proved he was able to present a show such as Top Gear without succumbing to the pressures of being a presenter, as we'd seen previously with the likes of Brendan Coogan. Had he joined Top Gear 2.5 years earlier, in the wake of Quentin Wilson's sudden departure, it stands to reason that Dawe would have survived to the end, as Porter and those around him felt he was an amicable figure to be around. Back at the BBC, however, all was not well. There's unfortunately no source available that details exactly what happened, with Dawe himself 13 years later claiming that due to differing car markets, his used car buying advice segment would not work in foreign territories due to domestic choices typically being cheaper and more readily available as an example of this. And this is of course true, but hardly relevant to the British public, who are at that point the predominant viewer base of Top Gear. Andy Willman would be very vague in regards to Dawe's firing, stating that things simply didn't work out between him and the rest of the crew, and only Richard Porter would delve into the matter further in his autobiography and on that bombshell, which is basically prerequisite reading at this point if I may recommend anything Top Gear related in terms of reading material. Essentially, both Hammond and Dawe were slated to go, and although Hammond survived by the skin of his teeth due to the BBC's meddling department being placated by the appointment of a new presenter designed to target the female market, the same could not be said for Dawe. In early 2003 he would be dismissed from the show and would end up essentially memory holed, as during the Back in the Fastlane DVD release, which came out in late 2003, all scenes featuring him were omitted completely, with Dawe not even being featured in the end credits. Furthermore, once UK Horizons closed down and rebranded as UK TV People, Top Gear coverage largely moved to sister channel G2, who would take Series 1 out of circulation after just a handful of years on the air. This meant within just a matter of years, people had already largely forgotten about Dawe and his contribution to the show. Of course, most of this wasn't really known to the great British public at this point, at least not to my knowledge. As far as most people knew, Dawe still had a role on the show, and it wasn't until Series 2 premiered that anyone knew anything otherwise. There may have been something during Series 2's promotional material referencing Dawe's departure from Top Gear, but none of this has survived the test of time as of yet. By the March 2003 issue of Top Gear magazine, Dawe was already conspicuously absent from the list of columnists, with Dominic Littlewood returning to present a column that was similar in subject matter. Dawe's insider dealing segment would last for another series, with James May at the helm, before being phased out completely. This decision was most likely made because of how boring it was for the audience, and how time-sensitive the segment was, with certain pieces of information being outdated from the second it went to air. With Dawe now off the television, he would set up his own eponymous production company, before retreating to his Sunday Times column for the next couple of years, where he would continue to give used car buying advice in print form. His next shot at the TV would come in 2005. Starting from August of that year, Jason Dawe would begin presenting Used Car Roadshow on Men and Motors, a channel frequently known as a dumping ground for former presenters of car-related programs on bigger networks. In this instance, Dawe had come from BBC Two's Top Gear 3 years earlier, whereas his co-host, Penny Mallory, came from Channel 4's Driven, which had been cancelled around the same time. Used Car Roadshow appealed to Jason's strength as a presenter a lot more than Top Gear did, as the show featured him and Mallory touring various car shows across the country to help a prospective buyer find a used car that was right for them. Over the course of each episode there were other segments, in particular Teenage Kicks, which were cars the two hosts had lusted after during their teenage years but couldn't afford to buy or insure at the time. 7 episodes are known to have gone to air during August and September 2005 and was so successful that the rest of the first series, comprising 18 episodes in total along with 2 best of compilations at the end of it, appear to have actually been shelved and retained for airing at a much later date by network owners Granada, as the show moved to the newly created sister station ITV4, with the channel commissioning a second series to air the following year. The rest of Series 1 would actually air after Series 2 had largely run its course, at least according to its official website, which, as I found out during the production of this video, is absolutely horrifically designed. From page links which have been dead for well over a decade and may not have even been alive in the first place, to inconsistent naming schemes every single page you click, to using inconsistently compressed and sized images of varying file formats, as well as a plethora of typographical errors. Regardless, the show was successful enough through its 2 inaugural series to warrant a third in 2008, with episode viewer ratings supposedly peaking at around 500,000 per episode. The official website's boast as the best car show on television is definitely more than a stretch and certainly farcical, considering there are at least 3 other shows on the air at that time which appealed to various levels of intellect and enthusiasm that would certainly suit that moniker better, but it definitely had staying power. The third and final series of Used Car Roadshow would air in 2008, and marked an increase in budget, as rather than taking place on location at various car shows across the country, the third series would move to a purpose-built studio, albeit a small one, and more than incidentally similar to the hangar layout for the first couple series of Top Gear. Dawe and the producers clearly inspired by what had worked at the time. There would also be 2 new co-hosts, Zoe Hardman and Chris Piper. Unfortunately, the show would conclude after this series, which featured 26 episodes throughout the first half of 2008. Like a lot of things that happened during Dawe's career, it's unclear as to whether the show had simply ran its course, there was a mutual lack of interest in continuing the show, or ITV4 had just flat out cancelled it. Despite this, Granada remained enthusiastic over the pairing of Dawe and Mallory, who proceeded to commission the first new show for its Men and Motors channel in over 3 years, which it named Classic Gear. As its name might have implied, this programme was designed to be Top Gear but for classic cars. It still retained a segment on used car buying advice, as that was Jason's specialty, but featured more in the way of driving sequences. I don't really need to go over this show in more detail, as it's essentially what it said on the tin. Top Gear's retrospective films on old car marks, which they had done for years at this point, mixed with Dawe's buying advice for those looking to bag a bargain in the world of classic cars. The show would run for a single series of 10 episodes before it was ultimately canned. Critical reception to the show was polarised at best, with critiques levelled at Dawe's style of presentation in particular. What's quite surprising is it seems this programme is in the United States public domain, as you can watch the whole series on Tubi for free. After Classic Gear, it seems Dawe finally called it quits on his on-screen career and became a solely print-based personality thereafter, along with updating his personal website through to 2013 before it went cold. Having appeared in only 10 episodes of Top Gear, all of which had long since been removed from British syndication, and even the BBC World Sales catalogue preventing their transmission after 2009, a sole DVD release which completely deleted his scenes, and a minimal presence in the magazine meant that Jason Dawe, as a Top Gear presenter, had been largely forgotten. Even the Black Stig, portrayed by Perry McCarthy in Series 1 and 2, still had a small cultural presence due to reruns of Series 2 on channels such as Dave. Along with many other Top Gear alumni and associates, Jason Dawe's next and likely final connection to Top Gear is where he decided to leave his 2 pennies in regards to Clarkson's dismissal from the show in March 2015. Whereas other former hosts such as Chris Goffey were supportive, Dawe was decidedly less so, viewing the events as something for an opportunity for other car shows to fill in a supposed void that Top Gear prevented from growing, which is a fairly nonsensical statement to make since it's not like every car show would have aired on the same time slot. There are many different ways one can present content for a car show, and none of them held up against Top Gear. That's the simple fact of the matter. Fifth Gear tried in its early years, but realistically airing on Channel 5, it was never going to be a serious competitor. Had ITV or Channel 4 snatched at the property, and there might have been more exposure. It's not like you can really blame Dawe though for putting forth such a contentious point. I think anyone in Dawe's position, where you came this close to being a household name worldwide, with a high 8-digit net worth, millions and millions of fans worldwide, and no reason to ever work again, would have said the same thing. Dawe came within metaphorical inches of attaining televisual immortality, but will instead be remembered as the Pete Best of Top Gear. In my honest opinion, Dawe was a nice enough chap and certainly had the skills necessary to present a show like Top Gear, but he just wasn't cut out for the programme, especially after having zero prior TV experience, unlike Clarkson and Hammond. He adapted rather quickly to the idea of being broadcast to millions of people across the nation and the world at large, but didn't adapt quickly enough. Dawe's ship was already sinking before the BBC decided to let him go, and only time would have told whether or not he would have been able to sufficiently develop his on-screen presence. What I think is crucial to take into account here is that Top Gear pushed him well outside his established comfort zone of selling used cars, which he just wasn't used to. In the span of around 4 months, Dawe had to adapt to presenting on TV, talking with his co-presenters, and presenting segments on areas outside of his expertise. Had he not worked on Top Gear, it's unlikely he would have found further TV work, and he can definitely credit the mild success he enjoyed throughout the 2000s thanks to the show, even if the impact he left on it was a minimal one. It's actually very probable that had the trio started with James May, the show might not have even been successful enough to warrant the three staying on board the following year, owing to the BBC's meddling, and Dawe's sacrifice might have been crucial to keeping these three together so that they could become one of the greatest presenting teams in the world. And so, that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and there will be more coming in the next few days. Hopefully it isn't August by the time this video premieres. As previously stated, I do plan to make similar, albeit much more in-depth videos for the three main hosts, in addition to one on the Stig, and I felt it was nice to ease into this series by having an introductory part on a host that no one really talks about, which will of course help when making the revised version of the Three Idiots documentary, which is coming on the 20th of October. Thanks once again to my patrons and supporters for making this video happen, but do be warned this list might be a bit outdated by the time it goes to air, since I've essentially made this video twice. If you'd like a sneak peek at 2 of my upcoming videos, or at least have a thorough read of the scripts, they should be going up on Patreon tonight as a supporter bonus. Once again, thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next video.